project perception. There's a difference between a project and an investment. For the investment, you do a business case analysis. You apply a different method, which helps you for decision making. But for projects, you have your project objectives and your project plans, and this is to be differentiated from the investment. And all of these terms are not clearly differentiated and not dealt appropriately with this, and therefore many companies don't get the benefits out of project management.
Hi, this is your project management cowboy coming back to you with another podcast. Our topic today is project management, the past, the present, the future. In Austria, if you were to ask who best represents project management on these three topics, there's only one person that comes to mind. I have a special honor today to have a guest here with us. He has a long title. I just call him Roland. Okay,
that's good.
Professor Roland Gareis, an absolute icon in project management, not only in Austria, but over the borders of Austria as well. Roland, welcome.
It's a very friendly introduction. Thanks a lot.
Yes, it comes from the heart.
Yeah,
comes from
I
the
accept
heart.
it.
One of the standard questions I always ask so that our listeners can kind of zone in is saying, why are these two guys talking? How do we know each other?
Well, it's a long story, I guess. When project management really got started in Austria, I was involved with IPMA, the International Project Management Association, with the local representation, which was Project Management Austria. I was the CEO in these days.
You were the founding father as well.
Yeah, kind of. And you've been active with PMI, which did get started in these days in Austria, PMI Austria. So in the early days, we've been competitors. And I remember some meetings which were not so friendly because...
Oh, I thought they were great. I loved our first meeting. A lot of people would say it was very rude. I didn't think it was rude. I thought it was very direct and very honest. I appreciated our conversation.
I'm more sensitive than you are, so this is why we see this situation so differently. But we became friends over the years, and what I really loved was that we played tennis a few times in the Wiener Park Club and so on. So yeah, I guess we have something in common, which is this interest in projects and project management, and that we both contributed quite a bit to the development of this field.
Actually, the first time I reached out to you to have an appointment with you, I was just founding the PMI chapter, and I went to you to get your feedback and to kind of say, hey, listen, we're creating something new, but we don't want to be competitors. We kind of want to cooperate. And I think it's a good analogy for what we're going to be talking about today. Back then, that's over 20 years ago, I was the new kid on the block, kind of green behind the ears, as we say in German. And you were the senior project management. You're a couple of years older than I am. And I learned a lot from the things that you did on the market, and that's kind of what we're talking about today. Is what we know from the past still relevant for the future? I know we've talked about this before when we were setting up for this podcast. You said, "What's the framework?" And I was going through the framework with, and you were a little bit hesitant to go into your long CV because you have a very long CV. But I think the listeners deserve to know a little bit about you. They've already found out that you're the founder of PMA, which is the IPMA subsidiary of Austria. But you have a really glorious, wonderful past in project management, and I think that should be interesting. I think that doesn't just underline your legitimacy talking about this topic, but also makes you an interesting character. I like to call it the passion journey. If you were to give the listener kind of a synopsis of where you started off, what your background is, what would you tell them?
Well, I hope you'll have a little time. So, now what I think might be of interest for the listeners is the relationship between my professional development and the understanding of what a project and what project management is. Because in the early days, you see, after my studies at the University of Business Administration in Austria, in Vienna actually, I joined the technical university a construction management department there. And this was back in 1973, 74. And what I learned there was Netzplantechnik.
Yeah.
So
network diagrams.
Network diagrams.
Which I still
CPM,
love and a lot of people don't use.
CPM diagrams and so on. This was the understanding of what's required in construction and what project management basically is all about. So it was one of the operation research approaches, methods. There was Warteschlangen theory and others. So very quantitative approaches to projects and to project management. And
very predictive is a word that PMI likes to use.
Yeah, correct. For predictive projects. But by definition, projects are socially complex, so nothing is predictive really. And so I guess in these early days, that was the understanding of what a project and what project management is. And this is how I was brought up with this topic. And later on, I moved to Georgia, and I worked at the Georgia Tech, Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, and also in a construction management department. So project management was applied in construction, in engineering, in R&D, so in more technical
and the technical
approaches.
Nature of it made the approach also kind of technical.
That's correct.
Quantitative, visual, reliable, that kind of stuff.
And what happened to me then was that in Austria, the engineering industry had, in the export business, had some problems, and the University of Business Administration, the Technical University, decided for the first time to develop an inter-universitarian program, which was called Project Management in the Export Industry. Mm-hmm. And they wanted me to be the director of this program. And I was not on the staff of the universities, but I did this as an external consultant. I developed this program, and for the first time, actually, we were talking about project management, not construction management. But still with this flavor of the technical orientation and so on. And only later on, when I became the board member of Project Management Austria, we applied in IPMA to organize the IPMA World Congress in Vienna.
When was that? That was in
1990.
Yeah.
And we had 2 years of preparation for that, and we were doing some brainstorming what could be the title of this Congress, and we were working on a flip chart, and there was project and management and so on, and all of a sudden we switched the order of the terms around and made project management to management by projects. So all of a sudden a new management paradigm actually to the approach that we say you can manage organizations by projects. And that meant that we're not only talking about technical projects anymore, but reorganization projects, marketing projects, and those required a different approach to management. So you are not working with CPM schedules there, but they were more open, more dynamic, more agile, I would say, in the terminology.
Also more
today.
Integrated with the strategic vision and mission of the executives. Yeah,
correct. Because basically you are not doing contracting work for some other clients, but you are changing your own organizations by developing new products, applying new marketing approaches, reorganizing, and so on. So yes, it became more strategic, and then all of a sudden also project portfolio management became a topic, because you didn't look at a few contracts that you were performing, but at your total portfolio. And all of a sudden people said, well, they're not only projects, but they are larger things than projects. All of a sudden program management came in. So based on this new vision that you can manage organizations by projects, the whole field further developed. And that was really a milestone in my opinion, and contributed to perceiving projects differently and also approaching project management differently. In my opinion, what happened in the industry was that there's still today a very old-fashioned approach to project management, still looking at it from this very quantitative and technical viewpoint. And that means that you don't use the strength of project management really appropriately. If you don't use a more comprehensive, more complex view on what projects actually are and how you have to manage and handle them.
You were a university professor and basically the academic vanguard of project management. So you had an interesting function. You have your own consulting company, Roland Gareis Consulting, which has been around for a long, long time. One of the first consulting companies that focused on project management and not on broad management subjects. Then you had one leg in academia, very, very strong, very active. Many, many years at the university, and then you were also the president and founder of PMA in Austria.
Yeah, I mean, PMA actually started the whole thing, and in parallel, I also did my consulting work starting in 1983, and only in 1994 I became professor at the University of Business Administration in Vienna, which is interesting. It's not on a technical university, but at a business university, and there aren't too many business universities still that have professorships in project management. But given that I was active with PMA, the university became aware, and I was teaching there already, but not with a formal professorship. And so in 1994 only I started to work in this position. And this was very helpful because on the one hand, there was the possibility, given that research was of course a topic, to further develop with a group of students the field of project management, and on the other hand, to transfer some of my experiences from consultancy to the students. So that was very synergetic. So I really appreciated these possibilities, and overall I have to say I was very fortunate actually to get involved in this field, because as we see, and we'll talk about it a little later on, it's still further developing, right? And this is, as I say, fortunate, because very often you're stuck in some field which is not really moving.
You mentioned that one of your first exposures to project management was over the TU, the Technical University in Austria, in the area of construction. Now, that for anybody who understands anything about project management, they'll know that construction is the oldest discipline or field of industry that has been dedicated to project management. If you look at our archaeology, all of our great buildings were built through projects. I think it provides you a strong foundation to understand project management. What was the experience transitioning from a more old-fashioned, I might say, construction project management paradigm to a more broader business? You kind of mentioned it that part of it came to this symposium that you had in the 90s. What was the paradigm shift from construction to broader project management? What can you share with us what that's concerned?
Rephrase the question.
Let's put it this way. If you look at project management, most project managements nowadays are focused on. Most people would say, it's IT, which is hogwash. Okay, a lot of people say when we're talking about project management, we only have to talk about DevOps. We only have to talk about Agile because everything is that way. And I think that's BS. The largest projects and the majority of projects today are still not IT projects. They're organizational development projects, they're product development projects, and they're construction projects. Construction projects, there's very few IT projects that can compete with the complexity of a large building of a dam or building of Burj Al Arab or whatever it might be. So when you started off in project management, you had this construction focus. So you kind of learned it by the rules, right? That's kind of the DNA of project. What you kind of mentioned, this quantitative approach. What led you to the understanding? This doesn't just apply to construction. This has a much broader management relevance. You kind of mentioned it, where you said management by project. What was the spark that kind of lit that flame? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, I think the major benefit of projects and project management is to work objectives oriented, that you have clear objectives, what you want to do, how you want to do it. and so on. And the question is, to what does this benefit apply? Is it just for construction objects that you want to build? Or is it to other topics like cultural work? If you direct a movie or an opera or whatever, this qualifies definitely as a project. But still, today, these are very traditional industries. They don't use the terminology of projects.
Or if they do, they have a very self-designed version of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there are different roles. You wouldn't find a project manager or a project owner or whatsoever. They have a lot of structures that they apply, but they wouldn't call them work breakdown structures or CPM scales or whatsoever. So these things qualify definitely as projects, but they are not perceived as such and are not managed as such. But still, obviously, they are successful, and this is feasible to do it in this way. So all I'm saying is there are so many fields where you can apply projects and project management in order to get the benefits, in order to deal with something which is of strategic relevance, has a high social complexity, and therefore also requires a certain complexity in the management approach that you're using. So I guess this is a never-ending story. There are so many fields. I mean, when I was active in PMR, we had a program, an Austrian program, which was called Project Management for Everybody. So we went to schools.
That's what I'm trying to tickle out of you.
Project management in the schools.
Yeah.
And my kids were so embarrassed, but they were studying at the gymnasium, high school, whatsoever, in Vienna. And I addressed the director of the school and said, well, I think that project management might be of relevance for your kids and for you as the staff of running such a school, because you have exchange programs with other schools, you have open days of the school, you implement IT infrastructure in the schools. These are actually school-related projects, and we applied project management for these things, and these were very interesting experiences. And we went so far that we also applied project management in the family. One of my managers of PMI in these days organized his wedding, of course, as a project, and why not, I would say, right? And my mother, she had a knee operation, and mother's new knee was organized as a project, and we had menu tastings because she couldn't move in the kitchen and so on, and all of that was organized in the framework of a project. And we worked with BAWAG, one of the large Austrian banks, and they organized these events, and we had hundreds of participants who were interested in, we had some 10, 15 cases of project management in the family. So, it's a way of thinking. It's this context orientation. It's this objectives orientation. These are the benefits. You don't have necessarily to call them projects, but
what used to be called
a mindset.
What used to be called MBO, management by objectives. Project management is actually the taking MBO to the next level. Say, okay, because I think this is what I always like to tell people when I talk to board members, right? They always ask me, what do I need project management for? I said, well, you guys are all great about when it comes to talking about visions and missions, but that's not even half the game. That's like 1/100th of the game. For your vision to come true, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the background that have to go through complex processes and coordination and collaboration to create your vision. Project management is the manifestation of a vision. I like what you're saying because it kind of reminds me, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey, the famous author of 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And when he wrote his book, his original orientation was business. But he also later came out with books for 7 habits for raising children, 7 habits for family, because he realized that the skill set that you have in project management is universal. You can use it up to many different things. funny enough that you mentioned that you offered also going to schools, because I was recently contacted by somebody who took my seminar, a French lady, who said, I was so thrilled with your seminar. We'd love you to come to our high school and talk to the kids about project management. So I can sympathize with that. Let me ask you a question. If you were to go back 20, 30 years, what would you say were the big challenges in project management back then?
Well, some of these challenges are still there, I would say.
That's why I got you here.
Yeah, the first thing is, what is the project understanding? What do people perceive as a project? And basically, it's a construct. It's an organizational decision to define something, a project, which requires management attention. And you give it management attention by applying professional project management. So organizations have to decide on what is relevant to be managed by project management. And so I guess this decision is crucial to understand what is the project, because very often, a whole life cycle. To give you one example, I'm working quite a bit in IT and SAP, for example. SAP has a model which is called SAP Activate.
SAP Activate, yeah.
Yeah, and so that covers basically the whole life cycle of a SAP solution. And but there's no clear understanding, basically, that this life cycle of a solution might be sequenced by several projects. There's a discover phase, and there you have to define the overall scope, and that is strategically so important that this discover phase of SAP Activate could be defined a project by itself, and then you have prepare. So we are thinking in chains of projects, and that is a very agile mindset behind it. But we had this some 20 years ago to say, okay, when you are now a construction or an engineering company, you have your contracting project, but there might be a bidding project before that, and that has a very different quality and a much higher complexity than maybe the construction project socially itself. So how do you define the boundaries? How do you set the project in a context? Do you perceive it in this context? Which means there are other projects. There's this company vision. You have to contribute. You have to pay into perceiving this vision appropriately, and so on. So I guess project perception. There's a difference between a project and an investment. For the investment, you do a business case analysis. You apply a different method, which helps you for decision making. But for projects, you have your project objectives and your project plans, and this is to be differentiated from the investment. And all of these terms are not clearly differentiated and not dealt appropriately with this, and therefore many companies don't get the benefits out of project management. And one other case or topic, of course, is the whole project organizations. Projects very often are understood to be the same like a project team, but no, a project is a temporary organization, and you have a project team, you might have sub-teams, you might have a steering committee, you have a project owner, and the whole project organization has to be established, has to be further developed, has to be controlled, and just this perception makes a big difference. And this was, some of the shortcomings still back in 20 years ago, and still today. I just had another podcast where we were talking about project team work and so on, and I explained there that actually a steering committee might be perceived as a team within a project organization, but nobody ever thought about explicitly developing a project steering committee in terms of speaking one language, having a common interest in the common view, taking on the common project responsibility, and so on. So there are still so many details actually to be optimized, and yeah, sometimes, to tell you the truth, I'm a little bit disappointed that many things
that we're
didn't get any further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me summarize, because I think you've said a couple brilliant things. Let me kind of call back to some of the things that you said. Number one, the delineation between what is a project and what is not a project, and what relevance that have, and what the hell is a matrix organization, and what does that mean? And is there a value? Do we even have to consider the concept of a project? Is it a valid concept? I remember my father was an executive, and when I used to tell him about my project stuff, he was always really excited. But one day he cut me off and said, listen, time out. What's this BS you're talking about? You're pretending like project management is his own discipline, and it's not just management. I said, it is its own discipline. I had to explain it to him. It was the first time I actually realized that executives, I think they use the word projects off the cuff, kind of shooting from the hip, but they don't really understand that it requires, I always say it requires a different set of rules. So that the delineation was one topic.
Let me add here. Bateson said a difference makes a difference. George Bateson. And what that means is that if you define something a project, you need to be very careful with the terminology. So as you say, managers use the term project very inflationary.
Yes.
But
do they know what it means?
When you call something a project, you make a difference.
Yeah.
And the difference is that you apply professional project management. And the question is, do you want to make this difference? Or do these CEOs and COOs and so on not even want this clarification, this transparency and so on?
Now you're getting to the deeper psychological issues, I think.
Because sometimes they don't want these benefits that you would get.
We're going to get back to that, because that's a hot topic. So the next thing you mentioned in your dialogue was the concept of, if we give something a name, okay, do we have a difference? Yes, it makes a difference. And you can use Václavic, the semantics and pragmatics and of language is important. The question is, do we have a common language? When I say project and you say project, are we talking about the same thing? I think 30 years ago, there was a huge issue. Common process is one of the things you talked about. You said, hey, listen, if you're going to call something, for example, the underlying philosophy of a line organization, which most organizations in their core still are, if something's essential, if there's a process that's essential to the organization, you give it a name, and you give it a department, and you give it a budget, and you give it resources. For example, accounting. Okay, some people say accounting is boring, but it's essential to the organization, so we have an accounting. If you're going to call something a project, do we have project management? Do we have dedicated resources? I think 30 years ago, that was a mind-boggling concept to a lot of people. And I think 30 years ago, we kind of fought for the concept of understanding that modern organizations from a yesteryear perspective would have to look more at what this hybrid version of a matrix organization, that you can have a strong line organization that has certain rules, but for your dynamic initiatives, you can use projects. One of the things that you've always been hugely implemental in understanding that there's a gap here is capability building. Right? I think that's still an issue today. I think if you look into the internet certifications of project management, I think there's never been more certifications out there. Everybody's confused. Nobody knows what they're good for. Nobody knows where they come from. The training for the tests are often mind-numbing. And I often ask myself the question, is there actually an education taking place, or am I just memorizing things so I can pass the exam? You didn't mention the word, but I would love to entertain it maybe a little bit later on, is the concept of, you mentioned the steering committee, absolutely important. I'm always shocked. I think one of my biggest consulting initiatives when I go to companies is I often coach sponsors and steering committees, because they're all willing and ready, but I always ask some subtle questions. I think a lot of them are not really aware of what their active role is. They know what their passive role is, but not what their active role is in project management.
Passive, you mean to be informed? Active is to take on responsibility and make decisions.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Passive, I think most of them understand that they have power, okay? But the question is active. Are they actively seeking out information? Are they steering?
Correct.
Are they just sitting back and waiting for you to, as we say in German, berieselt werden? I just want the information to kind of drip down on me, but I want to take a shower, but I don't want to get wet type mentality. So that's it. And the other hot topic is PMOs, because PMO is quasi. You talked about there's things that are bigger than projects that have a longer life cycle, programs. You also mentioned SAP, who is also an organization that I work with. We're actually doing a podcast with them later on this year.
All right.
Because I love their SAP Act. One of the greatest things I like about their SAP Activate thing is this, what you mentioned, this discovery and evaluation phase, where they said there's something that happens before a project that's relevant to a project, the business case, right? And you also mentioned something we had a gentleman on before, Oliver Lehmann from Munich, who has this concept of project business management that says, listen, let's stop pretending that all projects are the same. There's internal projects and there's external projects, and there's a correlation and there's a lot of overlap. But if you have a business case, as you mentioned, it makes a difference. It's different in comparison to creating a product or delivering something to your client. And that also requires a certain sensitivity. You've answered part of the question I'm going to ask you now. If you would look at the present, what are the challenges we're facing? Or what are the trends that you see?
Well, in order to establish new stuff, obviously you have to be critical against the existing.
Yeah.
And this is good, but also bad, because the whole movement of agile frameworks, agility, and so on came with a lot of criticism regarding classical, traditional project management. And this is bad, in my opinion, because I think we have to use the best of both worlds. So when we talk about projects, you can not only manage a project in an agile way. I only see hybrid projects, which means if we have something which is a project and it has a certain complexity, then of course you have to, maybe using the terminology of agile frameworks, you have to run different waves, which are project phases, and some of these waves can be done in an agile way, so you can apply Scrum or whatsoever, but you still need a project framework and you need project roles like a project manager and so on. And it's not enough to have your Scrum Masters. You can have those for your Scrum teams or development teams whatsoever. So I think there's the beautiful thing is that new things pop up and they need to be considered. There's learning chances, and you need to integrate them in existing frameworks and contexts. And this is where we stand today, in my opinion, that there's agile frameworks like you mentioned MBO before, now we call it OKR. Fine.
Same thing in a different dress.
Correct. Why not? It's beautiful. It focuses on the communication process much more. It's applied to organizational units and not to individuals only. So it makes a lot of sense. And in my opinion, appropriate project objectives planning, of course, is a major topic. And if OKR can support that, hey, that's beautiful. And there's design thinking and there's prototyping. And this thinking in smaller units relates to this chain of projects concept I mentioned before very shortly, that not the whole life cycle here is to be perceived as the project, but maybe you do a prototype first and then only you go into a series production development or whatever it is. So I think there are new concepts that are very helpful, but there's a need to integrate that appropriately in project management. And there's a lot of understanding required. And there are methods. The methods are easy to teach and also to understand. But the challenge is the mindset which is required for that, because the mindset within the own organization, if you structure the way of working differently, if you apply new decision-making methods like prototyping or design thinking processes or whatever it is, but also in the cooperation with your clients, because that means that you have to have the same understanding on how you work, what your responsibilities are. We for sure need integrative project organizations where you have representatives from your client organizations to take on responsibility for what's happening in the project, because if you are a delivering organization, you need the task to be performed by the client organizations, not only in terms of testing, but in terms of defining your user stories or whatever, setting priorities. So it's a whole new mindset of how collaboration actually works. And this is very, very challenging to be achieved. And there is a lot still to be done. I guess the concepts are here, but to get it really understood and implemented in organizations, we are far away.
Let me ask you some short, direct questions. When was your first introduction or exposure to Agile?
I guess it was some 4 or 5 years ago. So not too long ago. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because I have a standard statement, and I keep bringing it up in every podcast. I'm not sounding like a broken record already. I've been exposed formally to Agile over 10, maybe even 12 years. Mm-hmm. When you were first read the first concept of Agile, what was your internal reaction?
Well, of course, you oppose it, right? And you think, what is this?
Was it something new to you?
Yeah, definitely.
Was it new?
Yeah, very new.
See, I had a different experience.
The methods, the roles.
Yeah, no, but I'm talking about the
fundamentals. The fundamentals.
The fundamentals.
Good project management always was agile, not in terms of methods, but in terms of mindset.
I would even say
if there are new requirements, then you better adjust to those. If you don't, you're not a good project manager. What is this?
I would even say that a lot of the methods that are claimed to be agile have a history. I mean, if you're talking about iteration, okay, the great grandfather of iteration was the Deming cycle. I'm sorry, okay. The PMI, I don't know if IPMA did the same. I'm assuming, but IPMA and the PMI life cycle, which is a little bit different, is also kind of an homage to the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. Then there was this spiral model. Then there was a rolling wave model. SAP Activate or SAP had in the last 20 years had iterative models. The stage gate or phase gate model is nothing else than the release thing. So
correct.
My personal impression of Agile is I think they were absolutely legitimate. I like them. I like the fact that there were pioneers that banged on the table and said, you know what, enough of the formalistic, academic approach to project management that focuses just on documentation and doesn't have honest conversations. I'm not saying that predictive project management was predestined to be that way, but I think a lot of projects kind of shifted into that direction. And I think the new generation put their foot down and said, listen, this needs to be different. We shouldn't be talking to the sponsor only at the beginning of the project. And the sponsor, what does a sponsor know about the product? Nothing. Let's create somebody that's called a product owner that takes over 50% of the responsibility of the sponsor when it comes to making decisions. And actually comes from a line organization that's actually going to work with this product when it's finished. Brilliant concept. Sure. So you have an interesting background. I'm going to use as a metaphor. You have in your past been a professional football player.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
soccer for those.
Soccer for those who don't know what football is. Not American football. Not European. World football. I say this. Okay. Now the analogy that I was use here when you played, I'm assuming that you played with Rapid, right?
Rapid and Sportclub, yes.
The classical lineup was goalie, libero, sweeper, and three-person defense, right?
Yeah, sure.
What is the present day lineup? The present day lineup is, I'm not even know if I'm up to date. It's a goalie, 4-person defense,
It varies.
It varies.
There might be 3 or 5.
There might also be 2, 3. Okay. The analogy that I'm using here is that I think that Agile, just like modern strategies of lineup, give you new potential in dynamics and operational execution. But at the end of the day, you're still playing on a football field. There's still a goal. There's still essential roles that have not changed. The goalie.
You still want to win, and the game is over after 90 minutes.
And quite honestly, one team plays better with one lineup, and another team plays better with another lineup, whether it's tiki-taki or whatever the different strategies is. What I love about Agile, I think Agile has re-energized the conversation about project management. I think that's good. I think where you and I would probably see eye to eye, what's a little bit annoying is this concept that it's a revolution. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution. And quite honestly, the first time I read an Agile book, I said, this is brilliant, but I've been doing this since I've been doing projects. For me, there was never during initiation and planning, I always use predictive methodologies, even if there's Agile predictive, right? Because that's what management wants from you, right? But for me, there's no way to go into execution. Just like you said at the beginning of this podcast, you can be as predictive as you want. Reality, it's like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? If you're not using Agile methodology when you're executing, you're doing something wrong. Whether you call it Agile or not.
But that's the difference.
Yeah.
I think you need to call it, and then you can do it. If you don't call it like this, you behave similarly, but the Agile approach as such has a certain framework, and this, I guess, shall be and can be introduced in our project approaches. What's so important for me is, this process way of thinking. I think they're, in German, they are called Vorgehensmodelle. How would you call it? It's
procedures. Procedures is what or standard operating procedures is what
Okay. And for me, Agile, hybrid, waterfall, these are operating procedures.
Yes, they're tools in your toolbox.
And those are not project management models, because project management remains project management.
It's the full umbrella.
Yeah, correct. And this difference is very important because very often people talk about Agile project management. There's no Agile project management. Project management is starting, is controlling, is closing. And that's always the same. But to perform your content in a project, you might use agility as an operating procedure, or you might use it as basically we are talking about requirement concepts, requirement planning, requirement management. There's the waterfall requirement approach where you define everything at the very beginning.
Especially when you have large budgets.
Correct. And then you have Agile requirement work with user stories and so on, where you reprioritize and redefine new user stories and so on to be fulfilled within a vision. And that's, again, important. People say, okay, we work Agile in project, which means they don't have a clear objective. And that's ridiculous. What do you mean?
In German, we say Projekt durch Wurstelung, which means we're just winging it. Yeah.
No, this is, so the agility sometimes is not applied and used in an appropriate format.
I think also, I think I agree with you. I think just like Agile process has legitimate critique on how some people apply predictive. Correct. I think there's equal constructive criticism that can be applied towards Agile. And I think at the end of the day, this is my personal experience with clients. Clients will tell you what they need, and it's kind of based on their situation, on their culture, right? I don't know how often I have to have this conversation. So what's a product owner? Where's the project manager? What's my role? Yeah. Because ultimately we're still playing football, right? So we don't want to have a system that's so cumbersome that if you don't know how to play four-person defense, then it's useless, right? So it's one thing to call it, but this one statement that also triggers me, this wonderful statement, it's more important to be Agile than to do Agile.
Correct, that's the mindset issue.
And I'm like, yeah, but you're not a marathon runner unless you run kilometers. You're not a tennis player unless you play hours of tennis, right? So you can't, I think a lot of people are doing this agile. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you doing? You know, you have the big runner watch, you have a nice pair of running shoes, but are you running? Do you know how to do it? Does your team know how to apply it? Let's move on to stage 3.
Let me get
go ahead, sure.
one more topic as far as agile is concerned. I think the benefit really is the focus on the communication, and you have all these.
Also, the dynamic mindset.
Yeah, the
to not be so
formats,
stuck in the mud.
Correct, in terms of resetting your priorities and whatsoever. So you have these retrospectives, for example, in your agile approaches in Scrum. But as you say, if you're a good project manager in the past, of course you reflect in a project team meeting when you do your project controlling. You don't look at the hard facts, but that has a lot to do with the understanding of what project management is all about. So you need to look at the organization, you need to look at the stakeholder relations, you need to reflect on that. And this is, where do we stand? What's going well? What's going bad? What can we do differently in the future? And so on. So, hey, retrospectives is part of project controlling, of course, and
it makes that for common sense.
Correct. Communication in project, people say, okay, we can use artificial intelligence, for example, to develop project resource plans or develop project plans as such. This is ridiculous, right? That might support, we might talk about this in a minute, but basically, you need to develop a common project picture in the heads of the project team members, in the heads of the steering committees, and so on. And for this, you need communication structures. You need to work with Post-its and so on to develop a project culture insofar as you develop a common project language. Our perspective, my perspective of what project plans are for, they are supporting the project communication. If you develop a work breakdown structure, then you create a common view in the project team of what has to be done, how we name the different work packages that we need to do. So this is, the process here is even more important than the result of this project plan, because you develop this common picture, you develop a common language, you create a basis for the project work. So what I'm trying to say is the project plans don't have a meaning in itself. They support the communication in the projects, and this is what they're for. And this is picked up somehow by these agile approaches, that they focus quite a bit on this team communication and so on.
I think that if you leave the methodology or the Scrum methodology by side, I think the greatest ingredient, the greatest value that the agile conversation has brought to modern project management is that they address the crucial issue. In traditional project management, we kind of had this mentality, we need to get the okay from the sponsor, from the king, but we don't want to bother the king. So we focus everything in initiation and planning. We keep the communication cycles short. We get the approval and he says, okay, here's your charter, and then go and leave me alone. And Agile says the problem with initiation and planning is that you, depending on the complexity of your project, there's only so much you can nail down. There's always going to be a gap of what you know, the unknown, as we call it, right? So Agile says, it makes, first of all, often we spend way too much time in planning, number one. And we're planning things that there's no way we can know.
No, too far away.
Yeah. And the other thing is, wouldn't it make sense to get not look at their sponsor as a king? He or she should get off their horse, and they should do management by walking around in an age-old concept. And you know what? We'll have short, sweet meetings, retrospectives, we'll have reviews, right? And we'll talk to one another as human beings, right? And not create these artificial hierarchical barriers which don't contribute to conversation. I just this week was involved in a project management meeting for a nonprofit organization that was trying to get funding from the European Union. And they had a wonderful documentation, had a great plan and great detail. And I was smiling because it's kind of like if you've been in project management, you know that this happens. No matter how great your project plan is in the beginning, when people start looking at it and start understanding it, right? We have this wonderful saying, thought is not said, said is not heard is not understood, and understood is not agreed upon.
Not done.
All right, and then you have the done part. They had this wonderful plan, and they thought all they're going to do is present. It's going to be a kickoff, and all of a sudden, people were raising hands and going into levels of detail that were way beyond the plan, and that's kind of the reason why Agile says, you know what, the conversation is not done with a kickoff. The conversation about scope, time, and cost is not done once we have assigned approval for a project. There are legitimate things, and you mentioned
it's ongoing.
One of the things you mentioned, I think one of the biggest weaknesses we had in the past and still have today to a certain extent is the roles of steering committees. Are they passive? Are they report to me and I'll listen, or are they actively asking questions? Are they asking? Are they taking a mentorship role? Okay. Are they in removing impediments? Right. Are they asking how can we better integrate the project into our day-to-day operations? These kind of questions are essential, and I think they're partly lacking.
My point of view on steering committees is they are too large. There are too many sitting in there. I mean,
sometimes the wrong people.
6, 7, 8 people, even more in large programs and so on. So I see steering committees of at most 3 people.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
The others, we need to have stakeholder communications and they need to be involved. But we need to reduce the number of steering committee members in order to make sure that these people are really responsible, because if the group is too large, they do get anonymous. They
can hide behind the group.
Correct. Yeah. And they just sit in there to be informed and to take care of their functional interests. There's this HR guy and there's the accounting guy or whatsoever. So they have their specific interest and they take care of this. But they don't have the self-understanding that when they are project sponsors, steering committees or whatsoever, they are responsible for the results of the project overall. And not only that their specific functional field is appropriately represented. And this self-understanding is definitely missing. And I work with a few organizations which explicitly have a community of practice of project sponsors, project owners or steering committee members, whatever. So they work on their self-understanding, they make them familiar with the project management approaches, because they need to be capable to read the project plans and to give feedback to this and to understand,
They need to understand the process.
They need to understand it, and
that's my biggest issue.
Need to challenge the project management to a certain degree, because project managers lie.
Well,
sorry.
No, I can accept that. I think that's almost a given. I think that's kind of a kabuki theater that we play in project. We're often forced to accept unrealistic scope, time, and cost. So what other option do we have as to lie?
Yeah. This is where the problem starts.
Yeah.
Taking over a project, of course, you have the responsibility and you should have the right to challenge the frame in terms of the budget, the scope of work to be done. Of course, there were different people that did this conceptual work and these initial project planning and whatsoever. But when you start off the project and you work with a real project team, you involve the project team members, which are not really the experts and can tell you what to be done and so on. So there needs to be a redefinition of the project charter in the starting process. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's where Agile comes up with this. This is also kind of what I call a Trojan horse by Agile, the concept of minimum viable product, right? Which they kind of snuck in there and everybody thinks it's this cute name. It is highly subversive. It basically addresses the fact, listen, you're giving me unrealistic scope. And what I'm doing is just like, when you go to your sponsor, say, I want 100,000, he goes, I'll give you 80. What minimum viable product is exactly when the sponsor says, I want 100% quality, you say, I'll give you 80. Right? It's this trade-off factor. I mean, it constantly revolves around this triple constraint.
It's funny, yeah.
So I find it interesting what you say about steering committee. I don't know if I would necessarily agree. I think I would agree. I think what you're talking about, and I think this is also semantics that's something we have to develop in the future, is the understanding that there's different formats of different structural elements. For example, a steering committee. What you're talking about, I would call more the guiding steering committee or the operational steering committee. Those three people that want to be involved, that are kind of very aligned with the product owner or the project manager. I still think for political reasons and for integrations reasons that you would probably not as often as meeting with the operational steering committee. I would also have a kind of functional steering committee that, once a month, once every 2 months, once a quarter is informed so that they take note, hey, you've been informed.
But they don't steer.
Yeah.
Therefore, I wouldn't call them steering committee.
Maybe
in
we
German,
need...
it's Beirat or...
maybe we need to change...
It's a way of marketing.
Yeah, we need to change the name. And then what often happens with very large organizations is that you might also have, because, we always talk about the project sponsor. How often is the project sponsor really the most politically strong individual in the organization? Sometimes it's just a representative of God on earth, right? If it's a large organization, you have a board that's giving you a lot of money. They want to be informed as well. Not as often as the Beirat.
Yeah.
So you have the what I call the executive committee that gets informed, I don't know, every 4 months, right?
But it's not a project role to me, The project role, I want to have those people that take on project responsibility in the project itself and perform certain tasks. But of course, you have to inform the project, executive committee or whatsoever, your board of directors. But you don't want the board of directors as a project sponsor. Forget about it, because you never get this management attention that you need as project manager. They never talk to you. They invite you, but they are not there. So that's ridiculous. This is harming everything. This is not helpful.
Yeah. This is a feedback I give you from that statement. I think it's great that after so many years of project management, you still have a pragmatic operational approach to it. You're kind of let's leave the frills away. Let's focus on what works. That's great.
I meet these situations anyhow in reality, but I have to have my point of view.
And that's what we invited you for. Let's go on to the third topic. I recently got a feedback on something I posted on LinkedIn. It was a very nice gentleman from Germany that congratulated on me on a podcast and basically asked the open question: what do I think are the trends of today / future? And I thought it was a great question. What do you see? Where's project management going? What do you think what's the world of project management going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, basically, there are going to be projects, that's for sure. And all kinds of different projects. There will be different ways of managing those, of course. But I think what's important is you cannot do project management if you don't understand and optimize and have clarity about the processes which are to be performed in the project.
So we're coming back to the old common language, common process.
Yeah, but I'm talking about content-related processes. So if you are an engineering company and you have good project management applied, but if you don't have clarity about your detailed design or your procurement or your commissioning or whatsoever, these processes are not clear, are not in place, then you will never be successful in your project. So what I'm trying to say is we need governance structures which are integrated. And we were talking about one management approach where you have common basic values. If you want your principles of agile or whatever values they might be, that apply to project management, that apply to process management, that apply to change management. So the way on how you communicate, how much empowerment you give, how you integrate with your suppliers and your customers and so on. These are basic values that apply to all of these processes. And you mentioned PMO before, and therefore sometimes companies talk about a management office which integrates or looks at the integration of these functions, which does make sense, of course. So what I'm saying is there will be projects, but you need to be professional in the project, not only by managing them, but also to have good quality in the content-related processes. So an balanced overall management approach and an integrated view on those, I think definitely are required and would be helpful. In terms of
I like that you went right for the gusto. My response was I kind of tried to appeal, I guess, to the modern sentiment, because I think you put a microphone in a lot of people's faces, the first thing they would say is AI. Okay, yeah. AI. I think AI has some validity. I think we're not anywhere close to understanding what validity we'll have for project management, but we're developing that. The other thing was industrialization 5.0, the whole dynamics. If you're working on projects, if you're building factories or restructuring your infrastructure, these are things that will have implementable impact. I think another future topic is the concept of working with dislocated or virtual teams. I think we've come a long way, but I think there's going to be a huge step forward, because it's kind of hard to live the agile philosophy dislocated. Yeah. I think that's the biggest challenge, and I think we're going to overcome some of that. I think the development of here and there new strategies in hybrid application. I think the concept of rapid problem solving and decision making, whether that be over VUCA or whatever else, I think that's some of the future trends. That's, I think, what most people want to hear from you.
Yeah.
My real answer is the problems of the essential, fundamental issues of humanity have been the same for the last 10,000 years. And the solutions have been the same for the last 10,000 years. Maybe in different formats, maybe better, less better formats, different versions of applying the game. And I think that's not going to change in the future. I absolutely agree with you. Project management is here to stay. And if somebody were to really ask me what the future of project management is, I think they would be shocked on how simplistic and archaic and maybe old-fashioned my response would be. I wish we would stop talking about it, and I wish we would do it more. I don't believe that the state of understanding, I don't think most organizations really embrace projects as they should. I don't think they maximize their potential. I think the concept of programs is prevalent, but is still very sophomoric, very junior in its conceptual application and integration between the project landscape and the line organization. And I think what all of you out there should be ashamed of, most of you should be ashamed of, is that you use the word portfolio management and you don't, in any form or fashion, most companies, I mean, there's some exceptions to the rule, really live its potential. And I think it's something that I have no qualms telling any board member. I mean, if I go to a board member and I ask you how many projects do you have in your portfolio, and you don't know how to answer it,
nobody knows.
That's, as we say in German, fahrlässig. You're not fulfilling your role. And I don't even mean that as a blame game. You're just losing out on so much potential. Do you know how many projects? What is your budget for projects? How do you distribute your project? How are you mentoring, and from an executive or senior management perspective, supporting the operational and strategic or tactical implementation of projects on the ground? You have a responsibility. We have a pyramid for a reason. There's different levels, and those hierarchies have a vertical distribution of responsibility. And I see very few executives that truly understand how valuable project portfolios are to them. I don't think they have sufficient KPIs. I think the future of project management, hopefully, is sensible application of project portfolio management. And it becomes a little bit more second nature. I mean, I had one of my first podcasts was Wolfgang Raschke from Siemens. I think Siemens is a good example I mean, not everything at Siemens is plated in gold or 100% gold, but they have at least on a higher level, have a conceptual understanding that if you're a board member, you have portfolio responsibility, and that's financial portfolio, product portfolio, and project portfolio.
For me, project portfolio management is a strategic management function, and this needs to be understood, but it's not. And that's all that I can say to this topic. But maybe I can come back to the artificial intelligence issue, because I think, I agree totally that there's so much good available in terms of project management approaches and so on, which is still not applied appropriately and of course needs to be adapted here or there. But we are talking about back to the roots and a few things to do really professionally and consciously and so on, and get the benefits out of this. So this is definitely a strategy that I would recommend. But new concepts like artificial intelligence need to be considered. And I think those are pretty interesting. Tell you the truth, I'm not too familiar with much of that already, but I get involved in this in these days. And what's important for me here is to clearly differentiate between application of artificial intelligence for the content side of the projects and for project management, because again, I see that this is mixed up. Content side, just to give you one example, coming back to construction, there is BIM, construction information modeling systems. Of course, those are pretty smart and pretty far developed based on CAD and so on. For marketing applications and whatsoever, artificial intelligence content-wise can be applied in projects. And the second question is, can it be applied for project management too? And what I read so far is that the recommendations are to apply it for project planning, for scheduling, for resource management, again, for these quantitative approaches. But this cuts short, in my opinion, because also how to organize, how to manage stakeholders definitely are issues in project management, and you cannot focus here again on these quantitative topics. So the question is, which parameters do you need to inform your artificial intelligence system? So what is required, which kind of data, so that we can get appropriate feedback here or support for managing the project in your project teams, in your project organization. So given that the communication is so important and that the knowledge of different experts is combined in projects and so on, so this is a very complex process. And of course, it can be supported to certain degrees. And I've seen, that's definitely 20 years ago, I worked for Unisys, and they already had some parameters for their contracting projects, which helped them for certain technologies to develop initial project plans, and those, of course, had to be adapted and further developed or whatsoever. But this is 20 years ago, so again, it's not so new, the whole concept. But
the solution concept, though, is still a framework that can be applied today.
Yeah. And I've seen a paper which is funny, where they use artificial intelligence, for example, to design retrospectives in projects. Well, why not? They get some ideas. Because you need to vary there, because otherwise your team members get bored.
AI is not going to replace the need for individual consciousness, decision-making, problem awareness. It should be a tool to accelerate.
To support.
Actually, there's one more old and one more new topic that I see on the horizon for the future. One that's old. I still think there's a lot of companies that are questioning the validity and the value of PMOs. I don't question it whatsoever. I think we just need to redesign it. So that's the old. But there is something new that I think that can create value for the PMO initiative, and that is we often see organizations as a matrix organization, line organization, project organization, and we often forget that it's not a two-dimensional, it's often a three, sometimes four or five-dimensional. Three-dimensional for me would be the element of change. You've already mentioned, the discovery and evaluation process that SAP has. One of the things that I think creates an incredibly valuable addition to the project management understanding is the more holistic and long-term understanding of how we navigate projects within an organization. And that is the strong link between change initiatives, be it Six Sigma, Lean is a big topic. I think there's I think they're twin. I think change and project management are twin sisters or brothers. And you wrote a book about change, so I would ask you, would you agree? What's your perspective? How is somebody who's an icon of project management also a big proponent of the change? Where do you see the link?
Yeah, well, there's several things. One thing I would like to start off with, first of all, is how things are changing in my perspective, in my purpose of working and my role in the society here, community, is that for several years, the purpose that I represented was happy projects.
Yeah. One of your best books, yeah?
Yeah. But the original idea was if you perform your projects professionally with good project management, then you create happy projects, happy sponsors, happy stakeholders,
satisfaction,
happy team members. They get they are taken seriously. There is social responsibility you have versus your project team members and so on. So there is something like happy projects based on professional project management. So this is what I lived with, for 20, 30 years. In the last 10 years, I was focusing a bit on the topic of sustainability. And it became clear that the project itself doesn't have any value. The project is
a means to an end.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's contributing to something.
Something bigger.
So we redefined, and this is this learning and this adaptation that I'm thinking is required, and also to project management, that now our purpose is formulated as happy projects for a sustainable business value. So what do you need the happy projects for? Well, there is
it's a means to an end.
Yeah. And this is the business value. And the business value is economic, is social, is ecologic, and this is the strategic issue, and this is where the change issue comes in. Because you do your project in order to achieve something. And so you change something. So every project is contributing to a change. Every project. If you do a contracting project, then you change something in your client organization. If you have your internal projects, your product development, your reorganization, your marketing, you change something in your organization. And you are better aware of this in terms of deciding that you actually do this project, that you have the strengths, the capabilities, the competencies to do it because you want to achieve something for your organization. And second, that the project organization, the members of the project organizations, the sponsor, the project manager, the team members, are aware that they, in the project, are contributing to a change. People don't like change, okay? So there is working against it. So you need to understand this situation in order to manage it appropriately. So you need to communicate. You need to communicate the benefit of the project for your company. Only then the users of the solution and so on will accept this. So I guess change management has a big relevance for the single project, because you as a project manager, you have the responsibility to make the change and the benefits of the change visible to the rest of the organization. And this is not understood at all.
Yes.
A project manager understands, I have this budget, I have this scope of work, these are my objectives, I have to fulfill it. If this is true, then I'm successful.
Well, yeah,
No.
it's kind of I have an operational scope and the
Correct.
product. I think the biggest
this is
yeah.
too short.
I think I think we kind of screwed ourselves in the project management community, because one of the defining characteristics of a project, according to IPMA and also PMI, is that projects are temporary, right?
Yeah.
Projects are temporary, but the initiative,
There's an investment behind
the
it.
backbone behind it is not temporary.
Correct.
I mean, we're handicapping ourselves. You know, if you have an internal project, your return of investment is not in the life cycle, right? So, and I'm struggling with this vocabulary right now. OKR for me is very unclean vocabulary. Okay. What I find much more cleaner than I know from the UNIDO is the concept of projects have outputs. I think most project management love outputs, and we're shocked that nobody else cares about our outputs. Right?
Yeah.
Because most people don't care about the outputs, they want the outcome.
Yeah, correct. That's a business value.
And what you're talking about, which is much higher level, and I think this is the future, I hope this is the future of project management, is the understanding of this, of what we call triple bottom line. There's a financial benefit, there's a strategic benefit, but there's also a societal benefit, which is the third level. There's output, outcome, impact. And I think everybody is emotionally in love with the concept of impact. I think most people don't have a clean definition of it, but I think this concept of because PMI is kind of focusing very strong on the value of a PMO is to, sometimes they call it a VDO, a value delivery office, instead of a PMO, whatever makes you happy. Or operational excellence or business excellence is other words that we use for it. I think PMI is pushing the concept that we don't just cost money, but that we create value. But the only way to create awareness of that value is to not just look at your projects in increments, beginning and end, but to see what happens afterwards. And the only way to manage that gray area is to have a strong, well-established project organization within the organization. I want to, maybe as one of our last topics, that's not so much about future. I think this is something that's prevalent and has been prevalent in project management. And I have my own thoughts, my own historical justification for why this is. And I've been playing with this conversation, with this hot topic with a number of different people from different industries. But I'd like to get your take on it. We talked about how sometimes disappointed we are about how well the overall project management philosophy and governance model is integrated into the organization. That senior executives are still somewhat resistant to discussing the topic. Why do you think that is? And you can be undiplomatic if you like.
Yeah. Well, I guess I come with a solution right away, maybe. That I think that the success of the project, however it's measured, needs to be a part of the MBO system in organizations, which means the line managers are basically measured against the line results, whatever they are, and not against the project results. And therefore, coming back to the number of steering committee members, we want to have few steering committee members so the steering committee members can also be made responsible for the project success. So for projects, maybe one project sponsor or steering committee member, project owner, however you call it, would be enough. Which means they would have the understanding that for this project I'm responsible and I'm measured against, and I accept that I empower one of my colleagues for another project to take on the responsibility there. But we need to make the managers responsible, not the project managers only, but the line managers and the board members responsible for projects and programs of the organization. Because they are of strategic value. They contribute to the sustainability of the organization. So, hey, why wouldn't they take care of this projects and programs? So I guess this is the solution, and therefore, where's the problem? They are not made responsible. There is no direct relationship to the projects.
Maybe I'll add to that. I think if you look at the racing model, right? One of the things that executives love, if they have a difficult thing, they love to delegate, which is their prerogative. And when they delegate, if I delegate to you or vice versa, you become responsible. But a lot of people don't understand. I can't make you responsible without being accountable. The concept of an accountable executive, that's actually a term that's used in it's a beautiful concept, but I don't think it's understood or lived often, right? So I can't pass the buck on to you without still being involved, which is the agile concept, right? I did a small video, I call it Heaven and Hell, where I introduced funny little concepts. And one of the things we did was something called the whipping boy, the Prügelknabe, the concept, which goes back, it's a historical concept that, for example, and the principle behind the whipping boy was when a prince got their education as a boy and they misbehaved in school with their tutor, you couldn't punish the prince. But the concept of punishment was part of society. Somebody had to be held accountable. So what they would do is they would pay some servant so they could whip his.
Good, I love it.
And I think that I don't think it's done consciously, but I think subconsciously executives use the hand puppet mentality of projects. So you're the project manager. I'm going to make you feel good. I'm going to delegate it to you. You can't decide anything. Okay. It's like the hand puppet. The puppet doesn't talk, it doesn't move, it's the hand that's moving. But if the puppet does something that's wrong, you take the puppet off and you throw it on the ground and say, bad puppet, bad puppet. I think that is something that's still kind of in our DNA, and I think we need to get it out. I think there's two other reasons why there's still a certain hesitation or three, from I think number one, to be fair to them, I don't think they really understand it.
I agree. Which means, we are so often asked to develop some offerings for trainings and so on, and they always talk about the project managers. And I say, well, fine, good, train your project managers, but what about your project owners or sponsors?
We understand it.
We are HR. No, we are HR. We cannot touch them, and that's too tricky. And the second question is, what about the project team members? How far they don't need the comprehensive training a project manager requires, but they need to understand
the process,
the language,
the milestones, the basic framework of it. Yeah, I agree with you.
And their roles in the project, and that when there is a project team meeting and something is going wrong, they need to speak up.
Yeah. So I think the other reason, behind not knowing what it is and not knowing whether it's relevant, maybe it's too operational, is the mentality, I don't need to know that, or that's below me. Somebody else is taking care of it. I think that's still a mentality that's very, very dominant, which I think is detrimental. And I think
it takes time.
Yeah. And
if you're a project owner or steering committee member, I would say half a day every 2 weeks are required. It depends on in which phase we are, how complex the project is, and so on. But
I agree with you. And I think one of the and we always say that we have different things that you mentioned, that the number one problem with change is that the automatic reaction to change is resistance.
Correct.
It's in the DNA of human beings that we prefer, even if our situation is crappy, we prefer the known crappy situation to the unknown better situation, because it just gives us anxiety. And I think there's a hidden subconscious psychology also in projects, and that is fear. I think I think the line organization, which is where the power is at home, the Machiavellian power of an organization, which is necessary, I think they're highly suspicious of the integrative function of project management and where we put our fingers into. I'll give you an example. I did a podcast with a Navy SEAL and with a U.S. Army officer last year where I discussed the similarity between military organizations and line organizations, because we come from that. That's where we borrowed it from. And in the military, there's a beautiful analogy that compares line organization with a matrix organization. A military is dominant through size, numbers, process, orders, command, obey. Okay? Very strict rules. But there is no modern military that in certain contexts, in special contexts, hostage situations, highly difficult, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situations, you're not going to send out a whole company or a whole battalion, because that could be detrimental. It could have serious implications. So what military has learned to augment their operational capacity with and capabilities with is special forces. Okay? For me, special forces are the best analogy of what project teams are. What you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this concept of focus, highly trained, highly motivated, totally interdisciplinary, completely agile in their mentality. They know the rules, they know when to bend them, right? And they're focused on getting things done and not fulfilling some stupid process. Okay? I think, because I've noticed this also when you talk to officers. Officers like special forces in the moment, but they find them suspect permanently because they have a rogue element to them. They disrupt the force, to use Star Wars language. They disrupt the halls of power. I think, for example, functional leads, line organizations, feel that project managers interfere in their scope of decision making. They interfere with their processes. They interfere with their hardware. They interfere with their resources. And I think there's a certain hesitancy to not want to give project management more power than you absolutely need to. And I think that's why I think the temporary nature of projects is partly not just attributed because it makes sense, but I think it's also a way for the line organization to curb the potential influence that project managers would have on an organization.
So you need to show them the benefits of giving it away, because they might be project managers next time for themselves. And so again, it's a mindset question. And yes, there's resistance, and therefore you need to make this understandable and explain it to the people, for sure. Yeah.
Roland, great talking to you. There's one more topic I want to address, or two more topics I want to address. Is one, what you still have planned for this year, because there's some nice information that you'd like to share with the group. And one thing we always like to do towards the end of our podcast is kind of talk about what books you would recommend. In your case, that's pretty easy because you've got a bunch. So maybe we should start with them. You want to give us your latest book?
I'm happy to. I mean, you mentioned the Happy Projects book.
That's one of your staples.
But this cannot be bought anymore. This is just history also. And, I was at one of these IPMA World Congresses, and myself and a colleague of mine, we had the book with us, and there was some Asian guy, very nice and friendly, and he was reading this title, Happy Project, and he was just, going like this, didn't understand it, didn't really get the idea of what a happy project might be. So that was a funny experience. So it really was a good title for many years. But then, of course, project management is evolving. There are relationships from projects to programs and to changes. So a couple of years ago, we published, my son and myself, the book Project, Program, and Changes. It's available in German and in English language. So this is, if somebody's interested, something I can recommend. And here we focus on the agile concepts and the integration of change and change management to projects. The second thing I would like to mention, and hopefully there's some interest, many of you might know that we organize every year the so-called Happy Projects Conference. And until 3 years ago, we did it on site with some 300 participants here in Austria. It was great time every year, to find a new interesting topic and to further develop the concepts for this specific event. And I really loved to do this. But given the Corona pandemic and so on, we changed the format to an online format, and we do it now Happy Projects all year long. So we have 3 events starting in April next year again, and next year is actually this year.
Yeah,
we are in
it's
2024 already. Okay, and it's on the topic, and this relates to what we discussed today quite a bit. The title is Back to the Project Future. So again, the message there is that we need to appreciate some of the existing topics and approaches and focus on those, but integrate new concepts.
Be open to the new, but embrace the old as well.
Yeah. That's
for what it's worth. Very, very good. Well, make sure to put a link for the literature and also for the events into the podcast, so that when we send it out, you'll have access to that.
Yeah.
Roland,
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And we talked about it. If you do an interview, the interviewer should know more about himself than before the interview, and that definitely happened to me today. So thanks for some insights.
It was great having you on board, and I look forward to staying in touch.